My humble pranams at the lotus feet of Bhagwan. It gives me a great pleasure to be the opening batsman in this international symposium organized by the chemistry department called Recent Advances in Chemical Sciences. It's happening in 2021. Of course, 2020 had been a difficult year for everybody. And in this year, a lot of disruptions had taken place. With the result, a normal life could not be led by many people. This is because of the COVID pandemic, which the WHO declared as a pandemic in the month of March 2020. In this pandemic, lots of people have lost their lives. Economy has been disturbed. The problem that we are facing is insurmountable, and there are a lot of life lessons we have learned. In this COVID pandemic, the topic for my talk is going to be COVID-19 vaccine. When will the pandemic end? How will it end the pandemic? So my talk is going to give details about the vaccines, how much of the population needs to be vaccinated, and then when this vaccine will take effect, that would prevent transmission from people to people, thereby arresting the spread of coronavirus, thereby the infection due to coronavirus. So it can happen in countries that are small in terms of population very quickly, whereas in a country like India, it is going to take a little longer time. And we haven't yet launched the vaccine in India yet. Hopefully, the vaccines are arriving, those that are made outside India. And India is also going to be a manufacturing hub for the vaccine, where quite a bit of world supply of the vaccine is going to originate from India. In addition to the foreign vaccines that are manufactured in India, primarily the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, there's also a company in the United States called Novavax. Their vaccine is manufactured in India. In addition to the two companies in India, one is Zydus Cadila, another is Bharat Biotech, who are bringing homegrown vaccine. And those, when they hit the market, it's going to accelerate the speed of vaccine delivery, vaccine inoculation, and initiation of immunity in the people who are vaccinated. Thereby, those vaccinated will no longer be able to spread the disease, so that we break the transmission of the disease. So my talk is going to be on COVID vaccine. How will it end the pandemic? And in this talk, I'm going to describe variety of situations, various vaccines, the doses in which you have to give them, the kind of complications you can expect, and how are we all going to come out of it very soon, most likely by the end of the year. The presentation that I'm going to give today is COVID-19 vaccine. How will it end the pandemic? So this is a presentation that is more for the scientific audience, but there's going to be a lot of information that the lay public is going to benefit. So what is COVID-19? COVID-19 is a disease caused by SARS-CoV-2, which is a respiratory virus, an RNA virus. And that is an updated version of earlier virus called COVID-1, which is also called SARS-CoV-1. So COVID-19 is a disease caused by SARS-CoV-2. In March 2020, WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. So if you look at the picture, a scanning electron microscope picture on the left-hand side, you can see the COVID virus visible to you in orange, small spherical dots. And if you look at the picture below, as of December 31, 2020, you will see that there are 80 million people who are affected. And in European Union, 17,348,000 people have been affected by COVID. And what's frightening is that in the entire world, as of December 31, 1,770,695 people have died. And if you take Europe alone, it's 427,798 people. That includes United Kingdom. But if you look at India, the number of deaths in India compared to the rest of the world is much smaller. If you look at India's population, you will realize India is 1.3 billion, which is what? 1,300 million. And we have not even touched 1% of India's population in terms of the COVID infected people. So there are 99% of India's population that are uninfected. If that numbers have to be believed, this is a population that requires enormous planning and execution of the planning to make the vaccine available to all of them. So when you look at the COVID vaccine, why has it got such an attention compared to the previous version called SARS-CoV-1? The reason why it's got much greater attention is because it causes death. It causes death in those who are older individuals, and it causes death in the older individuals, especially if they have comorbidities like diabetes or hypertension or other respiratory diseases. So it is the death that makes people fear this virus. So we need to ensure that whatever we do, we try to prevent death from happening. So the patients usually present with fever, cough, shortness of breath, and tiredness. Diagnostics is important. It took some time for the government as well as the health administrators to come up with a plan on the best diagnostic kits that are available. The gold standard is RT-PCR. Then there are immunologically based assays called lateral flow assay, which is what is developed by SSIHL and undergoing validation. It's a test that would allow us to measure antigen and antibody, but at a fraction of a cost. $1 for antigen estimation and $1 for antibody estimation. And if you look at these two results together, we can come out with a very clear pattern on whether it is early infection or late infection or older infection or no infection. And over the period of time since March, India has experimented with a lot of generic drugs, which is hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and several antiviral combinations. And at SSIHL, we have done some wonderful work in terms of mathematical modeling to show which are all the antivirals when you give it in combination is most effective. And currently, we are also working on a very interesting project, which is, again, a mathematical modeling to tell you how many people should get vaccinated, whether one vaccination is enough or a combination of vaccines are best, in order to ensure that there is 100% efficacy for the vaccines that are given, so that people do not have to have any worry about getting reinfection. And most importantly, what is critical here is whoever is vaccinated should not be able to spread the virus to the next person. If that can happen with the vaccine, that is the greatest boon. That means you are breaking the spread of the COVID-19 from people to people. Social distancing, wearing masks, cleaning your hands regularly as hand hygiene, they are also measures. But if your immune system is primed to deal with coronavirus as it enters your body and does not allow the virus to infect your cells and multiply, you have achieved a great progress. That is going to break the transmission. The moment the transmission from individual to individual is broken, that's the end of the pandemic. Let's look at some of the details. If you look at the vaccines which can really be effective in stopping the pandemic on its tracks, you will realize that vaccines are a different cup of tea. In the world, people have developed a variety of vaccines against a variety of infections, whether it is virus or bacterial. But sometimes you need to adopt some new technologies. And for COVID vaccines, there are nearly 274 vaccine candidates under development. All these vaccine candidates are in various stages of development. And in the last few weeks, 4 of those vaccines have been approved either by the United States FDA or United Kingdom's MHRA. And these vaccines have already started to be given to people, primarily those who are older individuals, and then coming down to healthcare workers and critical people who are exposed to the virus. When you look at the virus vaccine for COVID-19, you will realize that there are so many ways by which you can make COVID-19 vaccine. So one is the DNA vaccine, another is an inactivated vaccine, then you have a live attenuated vaccine, then you have a protein subunit vaccine, then you use virus-like particles which can encode or in which you can put some of the sequences that encode for the spike protein. So you're not having the full virus, but these virus-like particles will carry the sequence of some specific component, predominantly the spike protein component. And then there is another category called virus vectored. And then one more category, which is directly injecting the mRNA, since it is an mRNA vaccine. So many of these approaches are very interesting. Quite a bit of them have worked very well for other vaccines, other viral vaccines, whereas mRNA vaccine is the first time that it has been developed and used in humans. And this is really a breakthrough in terms of how it can prevent a viral infection from taking place. So we can look at all those things in the following slides. So when you look at the type of vaccines, you will see that you need to create as the active immunity and or you can create passive immunity. As you can see, you have DNA vaccine, which is developed by a company called Inaugural. You have RNA vaccine, which is developed by a company called Moderna and Pfizer. Both these have been approved in the United States and in UK, and in many countries are in the process of approving them. Then you have a viral vector vaccine, which is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And there is one more that has been approved in some places in the world, is Gamaleya Sputnik, which is the Russian vaccine. So we have Moderna vaccine, we have Pfizer vaccine, we have Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, we have Gamaleya Sputnik vaccine. All of them have been approved. And Janssen's vaccine and Novavax vaccine, both are American companies, are awaiting. Hopefully in a month's time, these two vaccines should also become available. You also have vaccines that are developed by Indian companies, and they also fall into some of these categories, especially inactivated virus and live attenuated virus. Some of the companies are also producing what is called as passive immunity, where they generate the antibodies that are targeting the virus, and these antibodies go and neutralize the virus. When this happens, you realize that the antibodies will go neutralize the virus does not spread, and this is something that has been effectively used in individuals who have already developed infection, who are already in a critical stage, and in an intensive care setting, it has really brought benefit to a lot of people. So this is a very interesting approach, but it is called as passive immunity. But what we are trying to generate is the active immunity, that is to generate your own immune system to develop antibodies. And this kind of active immunity brought about by vaccination is far, far better than getting infected and recovered. When you get infected, there are a lot of side effects. And those side effects are many times damaging many organs in the body. That leads to lifelong disability. Whereas when you take these vaccines, it is not the whole virus that you're talking about, which means you will not have so many organ damage that can happen. And the antibodies that are developed have become robust, and they are called neutralizing antibodies that bind to the virus and prevents the virus from entering the cells where they can replicate. So when you look at the active immunity vaccines, you have nucleic acid vaccine, which is the DNA vaccine, RNA vaccine, or viral vector vaccines. These are the vaccines that have already been in the market, especially the RNA vaccine and viral vector vaccines. There are other vaccines that are under development. Hopefully in a couple of months' time, that should become available, which are the protein vaccines, where there is viral subunit vaccine, split virus vaccine, and all these vaccines have already been tested in other viral infections and have been working very well. So the model for preparation of these viruses are simplified in these cases, but all these vaccines need to go through an elaborate testing process, which is preclinical testing, clinical testing, before you can get the approval for launching these vaccines. So all of them are in different states of development, and hopefully, as we progress in 2021, many of these vaccines will become available more and more, and these vaccines will start helping people to develop immunity against the COVID infection. So how does it all work? So if you look at the DNA vaccine, when you inject the viral DNA directly, it gets into the nucleus of the cell, it becomes RNA, then the RNA is transported to the cytoplasm where the proteins are made, and the proteins are released so that the immune system recognizes the proteins and starts developing immunity towards those proteins. So these proteins are predominantly spike proteins to which we are building immunity. And in the case of RNA vaccines, you directly inject the RNA. So you avoid the step of DNA going into nucleus, and the nucleus is trying to produce RNA and bringing the RNA into the cytoplasm. But you directly inject the RNA vaccines intramuscularly so that they can start making the proteins. And these proteins are the ones that serve as antigen for the immunity to develop and antibodies to develop to neutralize the virus. So there is one more vaccine called the protein vaccine, where you introduce the spike protein itself, that is a fully formed protein. So you do not know what the RNA vaccine is going to do, because this is the vaccine that has been developed for the first time. There is no precedence for this, but it is so far been the most effective, and I will look at some of the results. Protein vaccines are still not approved, and hopefully when that approved, it might appear simple. So when you give the dose, first dose, you get a primary immune response. And when you give the second dose, then you get a secondary immune response, which is much bigger than the primary immune response. And when you give the second dose and you develop the secondary immune response, you realize that you develop memory B cells and T cells. And these memory B cells and T cells provide you lasting immunity, so that even in future, when these viruses are encountered by your body, these memory B cells and T cells should be effective in bringing out the immune response so that the viruses are eliminated very efficiently. So how does the RNA vaccine work? So RNA vaccine consists of an mRNA encoding the antigen, which is the antigen of interest is the spike protein. This is placed in lipid nanoparticle vehicle. The lipid nanoparticle prevent the mRNA degradation by the host until it is taken up by the cell. So this vehicle is very important. Once administered, the RNA vaccine is taken up by the host. The intracellular lipases degrade the LNP, exposing the mRNA. The mRNA is then translated to spike protein, and it is on the cell surface, stimulating antibody response and T cell response. So this approach has been adopted by a company called Moderna, and another company called Pfizer, which is partnered with a small biotech company called BioNTech. This is actually been an effort that had primarily been used against cancer vaccines. And now in the pandemic, they have started using this against the coronavirus with very successful results. So both vaccines carry the foreign gene for the whole spike protein. So the spike protein is the primary protein that gives the antigenicity, leading to antibody formation. So you inject this vaccine intramuscularly, the vaccine enters the cells, and the same thing that I said in words are shown in pictures here, that prompts the immune system to produce antibodies, activate T cells, and destroy the infected cells. So this is what happens. And if the patient encounters the coronavirus, the antibodies and T cells are triggered to fight the virus, so that the virus is completely eliminated even before it could infect a cell. That means you will not have any cell infected by this. So your lungs are definitely going to be protected, and you're going to be protected very well by this. So when you compare the COVID vaccine of Moderna and Pfizer that have already been approved, both have a lot of similarities, but the solution in which it has been suspended is different. The encasing of the RNA by fat, which is the lipid layer, is also different. But the method is more or less similar, and this method is the one that makes this vaccine at the end of the phase 3 clinical trial very effective. So when you look at some of the available vaccines that are already approved, you will see that Moderna and Pfizer vaccine has an efficacy of nearly 95%. This 95% means there are still 5% of individuals this vaccine is really not effective. But there are problems with the vaccine in terms of transportation, in terms of cryopreservation, and Pfizer vaccine requires a cold chain of minus 70 degrees, whereas the Moderna vaccine requires a cold chain of minus 20 degrees. And in an Indian setting, if these vaccines have to be taken to villages and rural areas, we don't have the cold chain established so that the vaccine could be made available to all the people in India. So the problem here is the vaccine, once it is taken out of that minus 70, within 30 minutes, it has to be reconstituted and then injected within a period of 3 hours. So this is a little bit difficult task to achieve in a rural setting. So we need to have other ways by which we should have the vaccine available. And in this case, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is really, really beneficial. And all the approved vaccines have to be given in 2 doses. But the Oxford vaccine seems to have 62% efficacy, whereas that is after the first dose. When you give the second dose, after 4-week period, the efficacy improves only to 72%. Whereas if you give the vaccine instead of 4 weeks, little longer than 12 weeks, the efficacy improves much better. So when you look at these 2 important RNA vaccines, you will see that the storage is an important aspect. The transportation is an important aspect. But if you can do all these things, the vaccine is really very efficacious. And when you look at the side effects of the vaccine, these are the standard side effects that you will find on all the vaccines. But in the last 1 month, when the Pfizer vaccine has been introduced, people have started to see certain complications that you need to be aware of. In individuals who are at risk for developing anaphylaxis, which is the allergic reactions, whether it is to food allergy or drug allergy, these people have to be a little careful. What it means by careful is you need to have all the anti-allergy medications available, and in case you develop allergy, it should be possible for the doctors to treat these allergic reactions very effectively. If it is not well prepared, then the allergic reactions can lead to complications. So allergic reactions should not put people off from taking the vaccine. Whereas in United Kingdom, they have recommended for the Pfizer vaccine that it could be given to pregnant women and lactating mothers as well. So when you look at the efficacy of the vaccine, as I spoke about, there are varying levels of efficacy, but the lowest efficacy is only with regards to the Oxford vaccine. Then it comes to the question, in order to get 100% efficacy, can you combine these vaccines? It is possible because already University of Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has started to partner with the Sputnik 5 vaccine. And they've already started a clinical trial by combining these vaccines and given. Hopefully, this should take care of the efficacy to reach 100% level. So such combinations are also going to be an important aspect as we move along in 2021 by giving these vaccines to people. So when you look at these vaccines, whether it's nucleic acid or protein, the administration has to be done by an injection, which is by intramuscular. The vaccine that is being developed in India by Bharat Biotech, the version of the vaccine can be given intranasally, which means there is much greater friendliness in terms of usage of the vaccine. So you need a syringe and a needle in order to vaccinate everybody. And that's a lot of syringe and needles that you'll have to have. and everybody should receive 2 doses. So if there are 1.3 billion Indians, you need to have 2.6 billion syringes in order to make the syringes and needles in order to make the vaccine effective. So from a logistic perspective, all these things need to be arranged by the government. So when you look at the safety and robustness of the immune response, all these vaccines, especially the RNA vaccines and viral vector vaccines, seems to have a very strong immune response. And this is the immune response that is very much needed in terms of neutralizing the virus if the virus enters the system. So can the vaccines end the pandemic? The answer is yes, of course, the vaccines will end the pandemic. And this is the paper that is published in New England Journal of Medicine on the Pfizer vaccine, where it clearly shows that the efficacy of the vaccine is 95%, and the 2-dose regimen of the vaccine confers protection in those 95% of individuals, and the population tested is above 16 years of age. And this is the paper that was published 2 days ago in New England Journal of Medicine. This vaccine is produced by the company called Moderna, and here also the vaccine efficacy is 94.1%. And this has very transient, local, and systemic reactions as a side effect, and nothing that causes major illness. So these 2 vaccines are potentially safe. And when this starts rolling, the number of people who get vaccinated becomes very important in order to reach a stage where these coronavirus will stop spreading from people to people. So the question is, can the vaccines end the pandemic? Yes, of course. Can a single vaccine be enough? Maybe not, because none of the vaccines are giving 100% protection. So the efficacy rate is really not there. So can you combine a vaccine for 100% protection? Yes, it's possible. We need more studies. Already a study has started where they are combining the Sputnik vaccine with Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So when those results come out, maybe we need to give both the vaccines in order to get the level of protection. So there is an inflection point at which when you reach certain number of population with the vaccine, that is the point when the spreaders versus non-spreaders, the balance will shift, where there are too many non-spreaders who are vaccinated individuals, and they come across the coronavirus virus by itself, they will not be able to spread the virus to another person. So at some time point, you will suddenly see the transmission level dropping to very, very small numbers. More than the transmission, what concerns people is the number of deaths. And I hope in 5 to 6 months' time, the number of deaths should also drop to 0. In this regard, I would like to mention that in the mathematics department of SSIHL, we have already started modeling studies on when will the pandemic end. We should really feel proud that the whole scientific community have come together in this particular pandemic in order to bring the best for the people. And the government and all are working closely together so that the cost is not important, the profit is not important. Protecting people is the most important, especially protecting elderly, so that we can avoid death. Because death is the most important worry in this coronavirus pandemic. If you can prevent death, then it becomes like any other influenza infection that you can get through and get over. You have heard my talk on COVID-19 vaccine. How will it end the pandemic? And I concluded that the pandemic can be stopped by giving vaccination to as much people as possible. I'm sure that the whole population may not be willing to take the vaccine. There will be somebody who might not want the vaccine. But if you discount those people, if majority of the people take the vaccine is really much better than getting the virus and recovering from the virus, which might have some residual effects of the viral infection, which might not be there with the vaccine. Even though the vaccine has mild complications like pain and fever few days after the vaccines and things like that, that is something that is not going to affect people in any way. The things that we'll have to wait and see is whether combination of vaccine is going to be effective. And if so, how quickly we give those vaccines, how quickly we cover the population who are vaccinated and make that number larger, so that in the end, we will hope that person-to-person transmission is broken, and at the same time, we protect the elderly so that they do not get infected and die. So if we can prevent death, that's a huge achievement. And if that is possible in 2021, I'm sure at the later part of the year or from 2022 onwards, we should be free from this virus and we can hopefully go back to the pre-pandemic time. So with this, I'll end my talk, and you have my email address here. And you can visit our SSIHL website to see all the work that we are doing in SSIHL with regards to COVID and other diseases. Thank you very much, and Saira.